Good evening, families, and welcome to our parent session this evening on individual learning plans and 504s. We are excited that you are here tonight. Lori Batara, who works with many of our families and supporting them with tutoring and with their IEPs and 504s at their various schools, is facilitating our session tonight, and we're delighted to have her. This information certainly helps parents just to get some clarity regarding what it means and how to prepare for those meetings with the school, as well as just a general understanding in terms of your rights as parents related to those types of provisions for your scholars. Without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and turn everything over to Lori.
I am really excited to spend some time with you tonight. We have a quick poll that we want to present just to get some information. I know some of you, and I want to make sure that I can give you good information, and then I can set you up for success throughout the time we spend together tonight. So I'm going to get a chance here shortly to share my screen, but I think Deborah is going to start by giving us the poll and just collecting some data. And really looking forward to seeing what everybody has to say. I can see some of you, I know you already. It's great to see your face. Always makes things a little less stressful when you're trying to get in and get technology working. It has been my nemesis tonight. So I'm excited that we've got things rolling. Well, this is great. I really appreciate the feedback, and thank you everybody for voting and just kind of giving me a sense. Overwhelming. A lot of you have some extra providers who are, supporting you and making sure that kiddos get the help and the things they're going to need. And so want to go ahead and get started now, just so I can make sure I'm on track. And it's kind of a half and half split, as you can see from the poll results, that some of the folks who are on tonight do have a plan in place, whether it be a 504 or an IEP, and then some of the folks do not. So I'm going to try to make sure everybody gets what they need. So that ought to be quite a big endeavor tonight. So you all should have your workbook that I created. And again, that was only just in case you have that type of learning style where, that fits better for you. Some people like to print that out and write as we go along. Other people would prefer to do it on their iPad, and just try to give you as many options as I can to give you the learning style and support you're going to need. So I am going to go ahead and start. We definitely took a look at the poll. And I think that I really like to set up, whether I'm tutoring, whether I'm training, whether I'm working with you parents, just to set some goals for our agenda tonight. And so my first one is to make sure that we know what they are, right? The plans, a lot of people throw a lot of acronyms around. And so I'm really going to work hard tonight to make sure that we don't have a lot of acronyms going around, and that any of them that are, I want to make sure I clear that up. Next, I want to make sure that if you do have a plan, or if you don't, that you understand what the process is for how we identify and then get plans implemented. Next, I want to make sure you can find resources and support if your child doesn't qualify for a plan, or even if they do, and then give you some solutions for success. So the agenda, it looks like this. I'm going to start. I don't know if any of you know Stephen Covey, but their work always says begin with the end in mind. So even in your workbook, I sent a ton of links. Well, we all know the internet. We know it really well. So it's easy to get overwhelmed with information. And so that slide had the links for you. And I'm just going to cover a couple of those to help you figure out, once you know what you're looking for, where the best place to be with those links, will be the most helpful. I'm going to cover the first part of our session tonight. It's going to be on a 504 plan, which is also known as OHI, and we'll dig in a little bit to that. Then we're going to kind of break out into some rooms where you'll have a chance to kind of look at ADD. I should be the queen of one of those rooms. And then we'll come back together and we will take a look at the federal plan, the IEP document. And we will also then explore some of the accommodations and different opportunities for supports for kiddos, whether they are in a 504 or an IEP. And then we'll do some planning and we will close out tonight. So let's go ahead and get started. As I mentioned before, I always like to let you know that it's a very short period of time I get to spend with you. And so comprehensive time together for one person to go through this is probably 10 to 20 hours. So I want to let you know that this is a highlight, this is a brief overview, but we want to try to at least get you feeling comfortable and get you feeling stronger with how do I start or how do I continue where we are right now, especially with remote learning, because that changes the game for kids who are eligible for extra supports. And so there are a few nuances that we probably want to talk through. And so good news is this is a little more interactive. And so there is a chance for you to chat in questions as we go. I'll take breaks or pause at certain segments and just come back and address some of those. And then we also have a chance throughout to have you chat in some of your information or some of your questions that you might be having right now. So we'll do our best to make it personal, but we do have, I think we have about 30 people on the line. So if there's some deep level questions, we can always schedule a separate time when we can spend some time together to make sure you get what you need. So on the left-hand side are some national organizations on the screen. So Rights Law is the place that I usually go to when I'm looking up specific questions. So they have books, resources, tools, and their attorneys, and they've been in the field for a long, long time. So if you were looking for legal pieces or other nuanced things there, they're a great source. So that link will take you to their site. Then you have a Parent Center Hub that provides some extra tools and resources nationally. And then the big one that usually many professionals go to is understood.org. We'll be hopping into their site in a little bit and we'll take a look at some of the tools and supports they have available. Then on the right-hand side, I just wanted to point out that the CDE, Colorado Department of Education, has a ton of support and a ton of information for families across the state, because each state will have different policies around certain topics. And so knowing what Colorado says gives us a really good base. The ARC is a great group here that supports many families with students and scholars with special needs. We've done a little bit of work with them already in trying to provide homeschool supports and just kind of connecting and dialoguing with them. And then the big agency here that really leads a lot of the community is going to be Peak Parent Center. And so on that slide, I've included their phone number, their email, and their website. And we will continue to try to connect with them as well, because all of us working together, will make for better supports for all our kids. So those are our resources, and we'll continue to kind of hop in and out of those as we go. But I wanted to make sure you had kind of two sets of places that as you had questions that you wanted better information on, you could go to. Well, I guess the big question is, how do I know if something's off? Well, there are times when you as a parent just intuitively know, but then there are times when you're not exactly sure. Is this appropriate, or is it normal, or does it align with 7th grade boys? Or is that just my child is a little bit different or a little bit off and maybe needs some extra support? And so just about everywhere you go, there are opportunities to find resources and academic level standards. And so whether you go to greatschools.org or whether you go to Colorado CDE, you're going to have what those standards are for those grade levels. My next slide really just captures an easier way to think about what they should know and how that would look. And I do suspect that many of you found out pretty quickly when you saw what was happening in the spring that something's not quite right. Is that the school or is that my student? And how do we figure out what's going on? And so the other tricky nuance, I think, that I found a great site to share with you is actually the behavioral expectations. So I know some of my students in the past have had a little trouble staying on task and paying attention. And so when I tried to look up and see what exactly should our students be able to do, should they be able to pay attention for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, there were great pieces of information and great resources that kind of let us know that based on your age, that's about how long you should be able to focus. And so I try to train teachers and help them understand that if it's a 6-year-old child or a 6-year-old student, they can probably pay attention for about 6 minutes successfully. If they're 14 or 15, then probably we can deliver instruction to them in 14 or 15-minute segments. Best practice, though, is even for you guys, 10 minutes of information and then 2 minutes to process is usually the way people will learn and retain best. So we did share these slides and the deck and the workbooks prior to this session. And so I did see a chat in there that if you don't have those resources available, if you chat in, I am sure that Deborah or Catherine could go ahead and forward those out. So it'll be a little easier for you to follow along. So one of the things that a lot of people ask me right now is, what am I seeing? And so you know as well as I do that, yeah, academics are off the charts in terms of needing support. But those underlying pieces for all of us, including our scholars, the emotions and the behavior. So this kid's health has just a drop down here for emotional stuff that may be going on. Anxiety, I think that's probably the highest one on all of our lists right now. And it just has a variety of topics in case you needed resources or support. And then the behavior. In terms of how is my student or my scholar performing in school, or what kind of behavior challenges might they be having. So you shared with me on the poll that that's really not happening for you or for the folks who are on tonight. And so I won't do any, drill down on that, but I just wanted to let you know that there are academic expectations. And then of course there are some behavioral expectations that, may warrant what kind of plan would be best for your scholar. So I tried to make it as simple as I could rather than saying, okay, well here, go to all these websites, because we know that's what a lot of people do. I just wanted you to have them for later. So by the time they get to middle school, which is a really critical piece or a big point for them when they go from usually 1 teacher to 6, that's where things start to really escalate. So they should be able to be organized and be independent. We know that's all a work in progress for all of us. They've got to have certain math concepts in place. We know that as we test and work with students, many times fractions, decimals, and percents are the ones that usually get in the way of them being successful later in algebra. So we do a lot of work around that. And then they've got to be able to write well and read well, higher level questions. And of course, then you can see on the slide that the high school, it just continues to amp that up and gets them better prepared to analyze and argue and debate and have some of those critical high-level thinking skills. So now it's your chance, because that's probably 10 minutes of information. So I want to hear from you. School shut down. Now you're the new teacher, and we're in a whole new world. So I'd love to see in the chat what surprised you the most about school and learning and academics when you were tasked with trying to help kids navigate from the spring even to today? Great feedback. Good. Kimberly, yeah, you homeschooling families and even the hybrid families definitely had a big advantage on the rest of us. Teachers are very overwhelmed. There's absolutely no question, but so many good feedback pieces here today. One of the news channels asked me today what I saw in terms of patterns and trends and what I thought were the big challenges. And you guys are pretty much echoing some of the things that I'm seeing and that I've heard from you personally, those of you that I'm working with already. And yeah, it's a big job, and there are just so many different pieces to it that it's a big lift. And some people, I know in my last presentation when we did the remote learning, a lot of parents weren't exactly connected, because how could you be, with what actually the standards were in school. and how disconnected some kiddos were from that. And so they had a lot bigger challenges, or some of them, it was a little too easy for them. So it's just been a whole mixed bag of all kinds of things, of what we've seen and how that's come to fruition. So thank you for that feedback. Please continue to chat that in if you didn't get a chance, and I'm going to go ahead and move on, just kind of seeing where we could go next. So vocabulary, I told you, they love to throw acronyms around, and they love to say all these words, and even teachers, you know, myself, even as a teacher, many times I wasn't exactly sure what they meant, but I was brave enough to just ask, like, what exactly do you mean by that? But many times people are not willing to ask those tough questions. And so I definitely included these acronyms in your workbook so that you could have them and a better understanding. We're going to talk more about that very first one tonight, the MTSS-RTI. That's the process that schools use to see if what they're doing for kids who are having a hard time is working. And so we're going to go through that and take a look at how does that come together for you as a parent, and how does it come together for your scholar. 504 and OHI, that's going to be the plan that we cover in depth shortly. Those two terms can be interchangeable, and they are just a plan that's going to be set aside that can go to college with your scholar. The IEP is the federal document that is federally funded and also requires federal compliance with any students who may have a learning disability or a diagnosis. ALP, I think Deborah had kept saying to me ILP or ALP, and so I had to just get some clarity around that. And so we do have, I know some families on right now that your scholars qualify as gifted and talented. And so that's another document. If your students have been identified as gifted and or talented, they have an ALP. And so that also has measures and supports and needs to be enforced. Accommodations, this is part of the work we'll do in the second breakout session. The essential message behind it is that no matter who our students are as a school, all of them can be successful. And some of them may need some extra supports to meet the grade level standards. And so we'll accommodate different parts of the learning and or the curriculum so that they can meet the grade level standards. And then SLD is the specific learning disability. And so 4 of the most commonly used ones are there on the right-hand side. The one we all probably have heard at some point is dyslexia, and that is going to be based on the language and literacy pieces. The dysgraphia is pretty much what it sounds like, inability to write well and to pencil grip and fine motor things that go along with that. The dyscalculia obviously is the math and how that impacts the ability for kids to get into algebra and geometry later. And then the dyspraxia, I had not seen that before. And so probably most of those students or most of those scholars are diagnosed when they're really young, and I haven't spent a lot of time in the preschool or the early learning settings, but I know some of you that are on do have young children, and so I wanted to include that as part of what you would have for information. So here's that part from 504 versus IEP on understood. And I told you that it's a pretty robust site and that most professionals use this as just resources and supports and all the things that they may need. And as we go through this tonight, we can take a look at what would you need? And so Carrie's just chatted in, how could she get one for emotional or behavioral support? And so as we go through this, you have it, you have the link, but we're gonna take a look at what would be the difference and which would be a better fit. So they definitely provide support, but they are 2 different pieces of work that will support students with different needs. And so as you look down, the basic IEP is going to have a diagnosis attached to it of some type of emotional or learning disability. Whereas a 504 is just going to have layers of support for kids who may be diagnosed with ADD or ADHD or some of the other health impaired, maybe physical impairments or things like that. They give you, both of them give you support and both give students accommodations. One key thing for my high school families is that the 504 doesn't have to be adhered to in college, but it is usually very much supported by their different offices there. So a 504 is more likely to be supported by a college versus a IEP that ends when the student is 18. And so there are different laws that govern and dictate both of the plans, but both of them do have federal attachment and civil rights that need to be enforced, because if students are qualified and they have written up a plan, then those are the things the school and the teachers need to be able to do. So here comes Carrie's question right here on the next part. And again, I'm not sure if you're following along in your workbook or through the link, so I won't scroll around and make you too dizzy too fast. So to get the IEP, there are 13 diagnosed disabilities, and this is where an emotional or behavioral disorder could be diagnosed, versus a 504 could have a wide range of different disabilities. And so typically what you see in a school setting will be a 504, will be for students who have attention concerns or mild behavior challenges, versus IEP that's going to have deep learning and or other needs for support. The key as we go through tonight is we have to have either a school-based evaluation by a professional or an independent evaluation. Even though some parents may want their students when they're 5 to be diagnosed gifted and talented or evaluated gifted and talented, or even with a learning disability, that's a process that we're going to walk through. It doesn't just happen automatically. It doesn't just happen because somebody wants it to happen. It happens because there is an evaluation that says this is what needs to happen and this is documented. And so we have a couple of really great organizations here in Colorado Springs that do the assessments and the evaluations, and we'll definitely have you get you the resources and information if you need that. So different people are going to be a part of the plan. But the IEP has very specific, every year has to be attended, every year has to have key people at the meeting. It doesn't always happen. And there's just certain parameters that have to happen legally. And the same is true of a 504, but it's not as stringent and not as strict. And then the final part is the differences. So the IEP is going to have a goal, it's going to have measures, it's going to have accommodations. 504 will just provide maybe behavior supports, maybe some other accommodations in the classroom and things like that, but you won't have to have that annual meeting. And so many different parts to this that we're going to drill down to, but I wanted you to see that there's a clear document that gives you a sense of which of those fits better with what's happening with your scholar. And so I see a couple of chats in there. I'm going to go a couple of more slides, and then I think we're going to actually get into a breakout room, and then we'll come back and I'll address any questions that are in that chat. Well, many of you have asked me, and many of us have definitely wondered, is this ADD or is this normal? And I can see one of my friends on here already, I can see her face. Is this normal 7th grade boy behavior? And so it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell sometimes. And so I never try to play doctor, and I never try to diagnose anybody. But having done the work for a long time, I can see clusters of behaviors that pretty much show me that it's possible that that could be ADD. And so we probably all have elements of it now that we try to multitask with all the technology. But in a classroom, as a teacher, there are going to be certain things that really show up. And so students may have a hard time getting focused, getting started. It says low motivation, but in my experience, I have not seen that. Most of my students who did have a diagnosis were very motivated. They just couldn't get themselves together quick enough to be able to stay motivated. They definitely do get frustrated, and they definitely make some careless mistakes. And it usually shows up for a lot of the students I had, especially in math. They know the math, they want to finish the math, and they want to get the math, but the little mistakes end up causing them to be very frustrated. part of my tutoring company in the past is we would have the students bring out their backpack. That was our first part of the 5 minutes. And so we'd open it up and you could tell pretty quickly what was going on. So I have pulled sandwiches and old things out of kids' backpacks, and you could see pretty quickly who was able to at least somewhat stay organized. And if I cleaned it out on Tuesday, by Thursday, it was a completely, just a complete disarray. So we did ongoing work and taught kids how to continually organize and reorganize and restructure. And so academically, if I'm struggling to focus, it's hard for me to get that main point. And so we use a lot of techniques and a lot of programs to help kids do some of that work with making a movie in their head and do some things that help them capture some of those important details and be successful. So this is our chance. There is a questionnaire in your workbook. I found it on theunderstood.com, I think, or .org, I believe, and it just lists some symptoms and some questions that I'm excited to have you get into your breakout rooms and talk through and just kind of analyze and have a different lens to see, well, this is what I see, this is what I think, and this is where I'm at. So if you need the link, the electronic link is going to be there for you as well. But at this time, we'll have you go into some breakout rooms for about 5 to 10 minutes, actually, because this is a pretty good assessment and a pretty good tool that I think warrants a lot of good discussion and some time to spend on the assessment. If you could, I'm going to go ahead and just ask for some feedback, and maybe we'll just call on a couple of people or ask a couple of people to unmute. I understand that maybe you weren't able to get through the whole piece, but maybe just a couple of key takeaways that you had individually or as a group. We can pull up the participant list and just kind of get a little bit of feedback first, and then we can kind of open or think about some of the questions you may have. So Amy, you came up first on my list because it's alphabetical. Can you give us any feedback or key takeaways you had from that?
One of the key takeaways, or one of the things we quickly went over after we got it pulled up, is that, and I had this experience myself, and I shared this with my group, is a psychologist brought my daughter in, asked her a bunch of questions. She answered them at the age of like 8. He wouldn't even allow me to. And then he was like, okay, you have ADHD, let's put you on Concerta. And I'm like sitting in this chair going, whoa, wait. Because these questions are, a lot of us can answer. Yeah, I do that. I wait till the last minute to start a project, but that's the way I function best. Right. Yes, I lose my concentration in conversations or meetings all the time. So again, I would fill it out and you'd be like, oh, you have ADHD based on just the questions alone, without really seeing an actual assessment or seeing me involved in a classroom situation.
No, that's great feedback, Amy. Thank you. And you gave a lot of key information right out of the gate. One thing that should never happen is that one person on one day makes a decision or does a diagnosis. Typically, what you'll have is you'll have many different assessments over a period of time, and then you pull a profile together to look at the patterns and trends. And then the other key part that I think many people are given misinformation about is that the answer, or the only answer, I guess, to ADHD or ADD is medication. And that's not accurate at all. There are a whole, just like a bucket of strategies and tools and resources that all can work together to support anyone who gets that kind of diagnosis with patterns and trends. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and have you mute because I may have someone else come in. It looks like Kelly, you're up next. Kelly, would you like to give any key takeaways or add anything to that?
I would just say I kind of agree with Amy. I think that for me, I would try to steer clear of, you know, a medicinal way of taking care of things. But just from knowing my son and knowing a lot of the behaviors he has and watching him on a regular basis, I would definitely say he falls in that category. And I actually just took a test, that test on that link that you provided, where it describes the two. I took a test for ADHD and he got 58 out of 68 based off of my long-term watching him and his behaviors. And they say that that's 58 out of 68. The higher the number, the more likely they do have that. So my thinking would be more, you know, a homeopathic way of doing it, either, you know, changing his diet, finding something, some kind of supplements that would help him stay a little more focused, etc.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. And thank you, Kelly, for, you know, hopping in there. And as a 30-year person in the field, working with a lot of kids who were diagnosed and who weren't diagnosed, you know, diet, exercise, talk therapy. There are a lot of tools and resources out there that usually my recommendation was always, if we were going to do medication, it was a last resort, and it was in conjunction with a whole bunch of other tools.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we're all kind of tracking. I saw a couple of chats that came in as well that, you know, if this is the case, then here are a whole bunch of things to kind of work together. So thanks, everybody. How about, let's scroll down. I'm going to just go through one here, and I see my friend Delia is on. And so I'd just like to get a little takeaway from her, because she and I have done a little bit of work with some behavior notes and some other things. So Delia, if you could share a little bit about what you've seen or maybe key takeaways, we would love to hear from you.
So I do have a child that was diagnosed, and I have a niece that was diagnosed, but the diagnosed process was not a one questionnaire. It was from the teachers, feedback from me, and then the testing took months to complete, and they were actually evaluated by therapists, and they went through talk therapy and play therapy, and there were a lot of different things that happened before they came to that conclusion that there would be, and some them also being on the spectrum. And so I don't think you can come to that conclusion with one view. I agree with that, but it doesn't recommend it to put her on medication. So we're doing behavior corrections and different techniques, and a lot of techniques that you have actually given my daughter to help her feel like she can actually do these things. So I think the best thing I've done is join this group and got feedback and got support so that we can deal with it. But then I can also see my niece, who's only 9, on the other hand, who needs the medication. So I think it's just going to be individualized on what happens with your kids. So one child has a 504, one child has an IEP.
Oh, thank you a lot, Delia. We're having a little bit of connection issues, but again, just your insight, and, you know, take your time, try lots of things, you know, work through the process and collaborate. It's really, really important. So thanks everybody for your patience, and we'll definitely continue on and move into the next part of our segment. So thanks again. Well, once we get to that place, whether our students may or may not have some of those symptoms, even if they're having a few learning challenges, maybe I'm not getting the learning and the reading, maybe I have a read plan, maybe I have some math things that are going on. There's a specific way that the schools are required to go through and figure out what's happening. In the past, they were very quick to just diagnose and say, well, this child has a learning disability, we're going to go ahead and do these things. And then it wasn't necessarily always the case. And so they developed this process called RTI, which and now has a new name, but essentially it's response to intervention. And so now the MTSS acronym means the multi-tiered system of support. And the idea behind it is basically that just about anything we do in a classroom, whether I'm teaching, whether it's behavior, whether it's any kind of academic or study skills or anything like that, 80% of my class, my tier 1, they're going to get that, maybe even in spite of me. So 80% of my class is going to go ahead and be able to master that. Then there'll be another 10% of my class that if I do a couple of little tips and tricks and a couple of little modifications, then that tier 2 group will also get that and they'll be able to move on. And then you have, and some of you have heard it from your schools, tier 3. And so those students, I've done a little bit of modifications and a little bit of adjustments, and they still didn't get it. And so now as a school or a teacher, I'm tasked with making sure that I do even more support and maybe even different curriculum. And so as a school, we'll try that for 6 weeks. And we'll collect data and we'll try the different curriculum and we'll try the different tools, whether we're doing behavior supports or academics. And at the end of 6 weeks, if the student has shown progress, then we're able to move on and not put together a formal testing or a diagnosis. And so if they do not, that is when it's the job of the school to pull the student aside and start the process of finding how they're going to evaluate and putting a formal psychologist or person in place to test the student to see, well, 6 weeks of this tier 3 intervention did not work behaviorally and or academically. And so now we need to do more and we need to find out more. And so that's the reason many times that it takes so long. So I know someone had mentioned to me, their high schooler was just starting 9th grade, and they said, well, we need to get an IEP meeting now. And I said, well, it is a process and it does take a long time. And so once you have the plan in place, then you can move things a little more quickly. But to get to that place, if I make one little bit of progress in 6 weeks, then the whole process starts all over again. So I wanted you to understand what the school's obligation is and why they're doing what they do, so that you would not necessarily feel like, well, they're just not addressing my student or they're not supporting me. They're actually going to try these interventions and collect data before they jump to a diagnosis as well. Well, there are a lot of accommodations and there are a lot of ways to put accommodations in place, whether it's for the 504 or for the IEP. And so I have a really robust site that I'm going to pull up, not to overwhelm you, but just to show you some of the categories. And so this particular group, I used for even some of the students that are on right now tonight to develop some plans and give a menu to the school, because the school wasn't quite sure on how they would best support that particular student. So when you think about making adjustments or accommodations, there are buckets or categories of things that may work better for some students than not. When we hop into the next segment of the session, we're going to look at the IEP and typical accommodations, and then you'll have another breakout where you can look at that and think about, well, which ones do you think would be most helpful for your learner and or just in general. But for now, these big buckets can be, thought of with just your classroom environment. The one I see all the time that I'm not really a fan of is preferential seating. Sitting by the teacher is not the most quiet place in the classroom. And so I have to kind of educate people sometimes that maybe that's not the best accommodation. If I already have trouble paying attention and everybody's up at the teacher's desk, that's probably not going to help me a lot. So we've got some classroom environment things, modifying or accommodating assignments and homework. And again, this is just common sense many times. If I have 40 math homework problems, I can probably show mastery in 10. I don't necessarily need to do all 40. I don't think any kids do. Test taking and grading, that one's critical, both in the classroom and in state assessments, because those timed tests are usually very, very high stakes. So if I'm in high school and my final exam counts for 40% of my grade, and I don't have some structures put in place, then I can bomb the class even though I've done everything I needed to do. So some of these are just going to make more sense and be more common sense than maybe some of the others. Another big bucket is communicating. And so hopefully with technology, we've done a better job of having the schools and parents connect. But we did see in the spring that didn't necessarily happen the way we thought it would. And so technology isn't always our friend, in the sense of some of the high school teachers now have 120 kids in their class at once because of the teacher shortage. So Transportation necessarily doesn't usually come up. Technology and support, working on an iPad, having some extra devices that are supportive depending on my disability can be really powerful. And then just kind of going through this list to see how could we best support students with attention, maybe with some different kind of modalities. And again, I said it's very robust. So it continues on through all the different academic areas and just provides a great support for schools, because sometimes they're not sure what to do. And so I saw the chat had a lot of activity going on. And again, you do have the link to that site, but you know, sometimes schools aren't quite clear. And so, all right. So Lacey says that we are back in business. And Sarah says that she wants a copy. It should be in your workbook, Sarah, but we will make sure that we include it, if not, in the link. And so before I move on, I hope to goodness that you can all hear me and that the audio is clear. So Lena, you were having issues. And so if you could just chat in or unmute and let me know that, yes, you can hear me, I will continue from there. Awesome. Well, thanks for the feedback. And usually, definitely, I can be clear as a bell. I can be pretty loud too. So thank you for the feedback, and I appreciate that. The presentation pages, and then there was a separate little workbook. Let me hop over to that slide to just make sure, because I know that Deborah and I will make sure you get it if you did not. This is what the copy of your workbook I created looks like. And so it didn't have all of the same slides that I have, and I'll just scroll through real quick to show you where that would be. So it was a separate entity, and so it has the resources, a lot of those links, because again, I could share with you in PDF, but that doesn't help you with a link. And so just some overview, some of the vocabulary, again, some links, the link to the ADHD test. Kelly decided she would take it, good job. And so then there are all the questions. And I guess that's where maybe the disconnect came from the breakout, and I apologize for that. The next part we're going to talk about is actually that self-monitoring. And so if I haven't included it, Sarah, thanks for pointing that out. And I will make myself a note to get that to you. All right. So I got ahead of myself, but that's all right. The key part for me, and I think, I know my colleague Kyle is on here as well. He's been a teacher and he's working as a curriculum director for us. One of the things that I know more than anything, parents will come to me, teachers will come to me, many people come to me and tell me that, well, you know, my kid is just not motivated, and you know, we're just button heads and all of this kind of thing. My kid is here, he's in the background. He had to come get something to eat from mom tonight. So the key part that I share and continue to share is when I ran my charter school, and every time I've been in the classroom, I basically say the same thing, you know, to the kids. It's your school, I just work here. And when I take myself out of that role of authority and or police officer and or whatever I might be that day, and have students take that inner ownership, then the game changes for them. I was forced to do this all the way back in the early 90s, where I had to create a checklist for one of my students, and then he had to monitor himself, and he definitely was diagnosed with ADD, and he definitely struggled to attend and to focus and to not shout out. And so having that little tool for himself to check and see, was he able to focus for 3 minutes? Was he able to put his name on a paper? Every time we can provide our scholars with opportunities to own what they do, that motivation and that constant headbutting really changes a lot. And so this was just a sample I found that I know schools should use. And I know Delia and I worked really hard to support her daughter in creating not just the actual checklist to monitor herself, but also what were going to be the incentives or what were going to be the key things that she was looking to be able to have. And so Delia and I worked really close in partnership, and then we also tried to work with the school. And so we had some success, but what we all know is that some things will work for a little bit of time, and then we have to make adjustments, and what gets measured gets done. And so if we don't keep monitoring and supporting, then those things tend to fall by the wayside. So based on the idea of some accommodations, based on the idea of some ownership, I'd love to hear from you. Just chat in some ideas on how you think you could make some adjustments, whether your child needs a plan or not. What could be some of the things that would help your scholar that you've seen so far? And it could be any of those topics: academics, behavior, confidence, motivation, happiness. I'm a big fan, and I know you guys are too. Great questions. Great questions, everybody, and great comments. So anything you can see so far that you know would be helpful, and Kyle has definitely brought to the forefront. We are working together to develop a self-advocacy workshop and actually an ebook and workbook to really help kids figure out how do you navigate, how do you advocate in a remote world setting. Good brain training. I know that that has come up a couple of times through the thread, and I know that Judy Hankey has done a really good job of working with so many of the families to just, again, work on some of those back end issues. So that's a great thing that you brought up. I appreciate that. Thank you, Donna. We definitely want to continue to work to provide some of those checklists for students to own, right? Very important. I know most of us have our own internal checklists, but we develop them somehow along the way, and it doesn't just happen without some explicit support for our students. Great feedback, Kiasha. She definitely does a great job of really following up and follow through. You can see that for sure when we spend time with her. It's great, great feedback. I'm so happy we're all together tonight because I know so many of you now, and it really is great to see, you know, how you process and how you see things are going for your kiddos. This is great. Thank you, everybody. Let's go ahead and just kind of pause, and we'll move on to our next segment where we're going to hop in a little bit deeper to the IEP. But I'm really happy that you already have some of these things in place, but now maybe with some of the tools we've come up with tonight and later that Kyle and I developed, that we can just continue to add, because I used to joke, I taught dropout prevention, 4th and 5th grade combination class with 18 students that all were diagnosed with ADD. And so I used to joke and I used to laugh that I had a gigantic Santa Claus bag of tricks, because anything I would try maybe on Tuesday was not working by Friday. And so it definitely was one of the most challenging but also fun years of my life. And so it can definitely, we need a huge Santa Claus bag of tricks for sure. So continue to chat in and continue to, you know, ask questions, and we'll definitely have a section there towards the end of some Q&A. So we're going to move into the section of the IEP, which is the individualized education plan. So I'm going to show a quick video because I do know that several of you have, you know, we have been in IEP meetings together. And there are many different things that happen when you are there by yourself, and or even when I'm able to be with you. And so this video really gives us a great lens from understood.org that lets us know here are some ways, if you are going to be in an IEP meeting, or if you get to the place where you're going to be even in a 504 meeting, it can be very intimidating. So I want to share this with you tonight, and then we'll come back and debrief when it finishes.
Hi everyone, I'm Trinia from Understood. IEP meetings can be challenging and emotional, but by following a few important tips, you can help get the support your child needs in school. In this video, hi everyone, I'm Trinia from Understood. IEP meetings can be challenging and emotional, but by following a few important tips, you can help get the support your child needs in school. In this video, we'll count down our top 10 tips for a better IEP meeting. At number 10, we have gather and review documents ahead of time. IEP meetings involve a lot of paperwork. The more information you have organized ahead of time, the more productive the meeting will be. Before the meeting, gather copies of all official documents. This includes your child IEP, as well as any recent progress reports and report cards. Ask the teacher for samples of your child's homework, tests, and student notes. Also, be sure to ask the school for copies of any important reports. As you look over the documents, ask yourself, where is my child making progress or still struggling? What supports and services are helpful? Are there any new challenges? Tip number 9, invite allies and supporters. It isn't easy to sit through a long meeting and talk about your child's struggles. If you need support, invite someone to join you. It's your legal right. It could be a friend or a family member, a professional who works with your child, or an advocate. Explain to them ahead of time how you think they can help. You might even ask to connect with them before the meeting to discuss your concerns, get their input, and plan your approach. Once you decide who to bring, make sure you let the school know before the meeting date. Tip number 8. Create a list of your questions and concerns. After reviewing your child's records and getting input, you may have lots of things you want to discuss at the meeting. It can help to draft a simple list of the points you plan to make. Boil it down to the basics, your concerns, questions, and suggestions. You can refer to this list during the meeting. Tip number 7, be clear on the goals for your child. For example, you may want your child to read at grade level or be prepared for college. Make sure the IEP team understands your expectations. During the meeting, the IEP team will decide on IEP goals that will guide your child's plan. These goals should align with your personal goals for your child. Together, you and the team can figure out the best resources and instructional approaches. Be sure to ask questions about what the team proposes. You can even suggest changes yourself. Tip number 6, be open-minded and collaborative. Everyone on the IEP team brings something to the table. School staff can offer experience and understanding of your child's needs and strengths. If someone brings up an issue or a solution that you're not sure about, hear them out. Sometimes issues come up in school that don't appear at home. School is a different environment with different rules and expectations. By working with the IEP team and your child's teacher, you can better address all of your child's needs. Tip number 5, share your expertise. No one on the IEP team knows your child the way you do. The other team members may be experts on education, but you're an expert on your child, so don't be afraid to speak up. Share your perspective on your child's personality, strengths, interests, struggles, and successes. Describe how your child behaves when doing homework, playing sports, and doing other activities outside of school. This will give the team insights into your child and ideas for how to provide the right type of support. Tip number 4, advocate for yourself and your child. Special education and IEPs can be complicated. Even if you're well prepared, you may hear new terms during an IEP meeting. When this happens, ask for an explanation. There are no dumb questions. It's your right to understand every detail and decision. If you're unsure about the IEP drafted in the meeting, don't feel pressured into agreeing to it. You have the right to take the draft home and think it over. After the meeting, be sure to stay in touch with the team. Following up on what the team said it would do is an important part of advocacy. Tip number 3, get your child involved. At some point, you may want to have your child attend or even lead their own IEP meetings. But even before then, it's important to get your child involved in the process. Before you go to an IEP meeting, ask your child what's going well in school and what isn't. You may be surprised at how insightful kids can be. After the IEP meeting, make sure to tell your child what happened in an age-appropriate way. Talk about any new services or changes. When kids get involved early, it helps them get ready to take responsibility for their own education someday. Tip number 2, focus on your child's strengths. In IEP meetings, it's easy to get bogged down in all the areas where your child struggles. Make sure to spend some time in the meeting focusing on your child's strengths. It's as simple as asking the IEP team, what is your child doing well in class? In what areas did your child score highly on any evaluations? Think about ways you can harness those strengths to help your child make progress in school. And the top tip for a better IEP meeting is keep track of everything in one place. How can you keep track of the test results, report cards, official documents, and other paperwork related to your child's IEP? The best way to stay on top of it all is to keep everything in one place. We suggest putting all important documents in an IEP binder. You can also use the binder to keep track of notes you've taken at IEP meetings and concerns you've jotted down. Need help with organization? Check out the description below for a link to a free IEP binder download that you can use. In the download, you'll get an IEP binder checklist, a school contact sheet, a communication log, and a goal tracker. It's truly a game changer if you want a better IEP meeting. Finally, let us know in the comments what you think is the most important tip for IEP meetings and why. We'd love to.
So I saw the chat going and I was happy to see that because there's so many things resonated during that. And I have included the actual IEP binder checklist. And of course that reminds me right away, I know someone in here has a color-coded binder that she uses on a regular basis. And so I definitely will, again, make sure that you get the workbook, but you also get the links to some of those tools and resources if they weren't included. Because again, the whole point of this is to have you empowered and to have you engaged and then figuring out ways, just like the young lady said, to make sure your children are involved and that the scholars themselves can do some of the work. So, Lacey, I'm sorry that the definite audio connection isn't going well for you. I'm pretty sure that I'm okay. I wasn't in the beginning. We had quite a heavy lift. Maybe if you tried to sign off and sign back in, you'd have a little bit better success. I'm not sure. But thank you all for the comments. I know Kyle hopped in and talked about having a magnetic feelings chart and some other different things. And so again, throughout the chat, there are terrific parent-to-parent conversation tips and resources and lots of good things. So let's take a look. If we know, we've kind of started to see, well, seems like maybe our scholar isn't keeping up academically, or maybe someone's brought it to our attention. What's the process going to look like, and how do we navigate it well without feeling overwhelmed and feeling frustrated? And so the 7 steps are pretty much identified here. And so I've kind of touched upon them, and we're going to drill down a little bit on each one so you have a better idea on how that should happen or how that could happen. Well, that big one is the testing. Again, we don't want just an informal conversation and an informal piece of information. The schools won't really allow that. And so they have a key part that they ask and that they want us to have. And so we have to either have an external diagnosis and or have someone from the school. And so it could be the clinical psychologist right there at the school, but typically that may take anywhere from 3 to 6 months. Many of you know I'm from the state of Florida. It could take 1 year and 6 months in Broward County schools. So I think we have some advantages to being here in Colorado Springs, but again, when we're dealing with our kiddos, time is of the essence. And so one great group here that I know has done some work and takes some insurances is Brain and Body Integration. I know they take Medicaid and they take some insurances and they take some supports, and they're very responsive and they're able to get that information out pretty quickly. So finding the right person to get that test and to get that diagnosis will be really important to the next steps. Well, I mentioned before, and I know that some of you have thought I was crazy in the past, but now you're sure of it. Accommodations. Well, you found out when you were home that some of these accommodations may make sense and some of them might not. When the schools set up a plan and they decide, well, you know, these are the things we're going to adjust or accommodate to help our student or help the scholar be successful, we're just going to list them. And inevitably, I've seen many things that were wrong about the accommodations, but there were a lot that were right. And so I found this great graphic that is in your workbook and that you should have available. I would love for you to take a look at these in a breakout room. I love that the right-hand side also kind of gives you a lens to how could you help your scholar. And so unfortunately or fortunately, you are their primary teacher right now in many cases. And even if you weren't, you know, your scholar went back on Friday and now they're back on quarantine. So with all these moving parts, having some of these ideas right at your fingertips, I think is going to be very powerful for you. And so my hopes is as you hop into your breakout room, you can talk a little bit about the accommodations and brainstorm some of the things that you think are most important or that have been the most helpful. And when we come back, we can certainly debrief, and I'd love to hear, you know, how your group put some things together. Well, welcome back, everybody. Looks like just about everybody has come back, and I'm going to do. And it looks like Lacey is back. Thank you, Lacey. If you can mute, that would be awesome. We're all still getting this technology going. And so I want to just kind of hear from a couple of folks. What was something that came up during your discussion? And so I'm just scrolling down my list and I'm starting from the bottom up. I see Sarah. Of course you were going to be last. Can you tell us any good takeaway you came back with from your group?
Well, unfortunately, we were having a lot of connection issues. I was the primary talker, unfortunately, but I guess like what I was saying in the chat and everything was that I wish that I can get a hold of that booklet so that I can make like a throughout the whole like her learning process. She would like all school years and stuff until she's like out of high school. I can just have a workbook that I could build on. But there was a nice little list there. And again, I looked very thoroughly under my emails to find work that you were referencing, and I wasn't able to. And there was 2 links that were sent. But I will say that I have utilized some of the resources, but like IEP at 504 testing and stuff, that hasn't really come up. There hasn't been an extreme concern, but I don't know if it's because of there's just probably lack of knowledge there as far as the resources that are available to the school and to myself. So I think that was one of the things that I struggle with for the private school that we go to. It's just we just don't have the knowledge or the resources and how to handle that. That's why I reached out to you. So it has helped me open up my eyes, and you know, coming into these meetings, I'm always searching for new information. So anything is helpful. Anything I can grasp, anything I can hold on to, I will. So, thank you.
Well, thanks. We'll make sure you get it if it didn't come through for whatever reason. And I did go ahead and put in the chat box for anybody who wanted the big, long groups of accommodations. Number 1, that link is put in there. And also the YouTube video for the 10 tips. The only thing missing will be the understood booklet that you were asking for. And my last couple of slides actually have the binder checklist in them. And so let's hear from Aaron. Aaron Valora was the parent of one of my favorite students.
Yeah, right.
No, he is. He is. He's awesome.
We just discussed, since I'm a homeschooler, the different things that I do for my son and my, you know, kind of redirects him and keep him focused. And I use a lot of rhyming activities and curriculum that goes and does beats and songs to keep him his attention, and because the jingles stay in his head forever, and that kind of thing. And I make him keep an agenda. I know a lot of other moms were saying that they make their child keep an agenda as well, and this is the first year I've made him do that, and we're going to see how it works because he's got to learn this.
All that's
So, yeah.
awesome. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And so I see a lot of people chatting in and just different feedback. I know, you know, all of us working together, you have a lot of resources, a lot of ideas as parents and as families. And so that always just adds more to our conversation. And so I'm going to move through some of the other pieces so we can wrap up parts of what we're doing, but I'll also be on the line a little bit after, just checking the chat and making sure that I've responded to some of the things you needed. And so I'm happy that you found the accommodation list helpful. I do know that some of my key takeaways that I want to share with you include some of these key points. And so I know that trainers should never have more than 10 words on a slide. This time I have gone ahead and changed that just because I wanted to capture the information. And so some of the big problems or issues or concerns that I have had a chance to work with some of you and the school, and just in general. My next slide really reflects to the fact that most teachers don't even get the IEP. I know I have done coaching for teachers across the US, and I've gone into their classroom in April and said, well, you know, have you addressed this young man's lack of hearing? And they said, what do you mean? I said, he has an IEP because he's partially deaf. They said, I didn't even know he had an IEP. And so I'm sure Kyle and many other teachers can testify that a lot of times that information doesn't get communicated. And so again, I know the lady on the video really reminded us all that you know your child best, and you can and should advocate. Some of the goals I've seen, I know one particular group of students right now, when they got their testing back, it showed they had low scores in reading and in math. And so not a problem and not an issue, easy to make adjustments for every student. But when we looked at the federal document, the IEP, there were no goals for reading. And so this particular student had plenty of goals for math, and they didn't align with what her testing said. And that's my chance to go in and work with you to say, hey, these things don't line up. We need to have the school make sure that those work and that she gets the goals in reading. And so even on the Zoom IEP meeting, the school wanted to skip right through and just continue through the math. And I said, hold on a minute, you know, this is what we need to do. And so it can be kind of scary, it can be intimidating, but it's really, really important. And so we were able to get that school turned around a little bit. Again, thinking about the accommodations when you're in the meeting, if they say preferential seating or they want to sit them by the teacher, well, is that necessarily a good idea? It may or may not be. I mentioned that earlier in the session. And then the other part, they'll say, oh, well, we'll give them extra time and they can have extended time on their classwork. Well, you need to know exactly how much time, because the confusion will come up where our middle school or high schooler may say, oh, well, I've got plenty of time and I can turn it in whenever I want. And so then the teacher may not know, the student may not know, and now we have a big conflict. And so I ask my students to have the exact time and a half, means 1 day and a half. So I know the deadline and they know the deadline, and we don't end up in any conflict or confusion because we have it very specific. I have one family right now, and the school has decided that audiobooks are the best intervention, the best support, and they're wonderful and they're an added feature. But they chose to put together audiobooks in lieu of teaching this young man how to read with his dyslexia. And so my conversation is, well, when he gets to his job or he has his career, will they provide his work manual in an audiobook format for him? And I know I'm being silly, but the fact is I always look at every student I get a chance to spend time with, not just where they are today, but where are they going to be when they get to high school? Where are they going to be when they leave high school? And what are the things that are really critical that have to happen for them? And so those are the tough questions that I ask and that I kind of demand some answers to. Many of the IEPs I've looked at will have a lot of teacher opinion in them. And so if they say things like, well, he's not motivated and he doesn't try very hard and he's this or she isn't paying attention, those are opinion statements and they don't belong in an IEP. The only thing that should be in that document are facts and data. not a teacher's personal opinion about what they think the child is doing or what they think the child should have. And that, you know, things like that, just they're not kosher and they don't make good sense, and they don't help students. And then again, that small group. And, we're going to have them in a small group. Well, really, what does small group mean? Does that mean 1 to 5 students, 6 to 10 students? So really pinning the school down and having that in writing is going to be your best bet. And again, those resources will probably help guide you a little bit to figure out what are the things that are going to make the most sense and how do I get the school to do the things that my student needs to have happen. Well, this is the big key, because many times it is not often implemented in a way that makes sense. And so a lot of parents have come to me and asked, well, Lori, how can I make sure that the school is following the IEP? Well, I like this slide a lot, and I think it provides all the way back when we were looking at student ownership. Students at some point would be key to have them lead the IEP, and also to make sure that they know what's on it and what things should be happening in the classroom. So the slide just says one of the best ways to make sure it's being followed by help is to make sure that your child understands what's in it. And then teaching them those advocacy skills that Kyle pointed out, and then he and I are developing a whole workshop on, teaching them the advocacy skills to ask for what they need and to do it in a way that makes sense. One school has just said, well, you know, he needs to ask for help. Well, that's true. But have you taught him how to ask for help? Because number one, as a student or anything in a middle school or high school classroom, I'm not going to raise my hand and ask for help. The reality is I have to make a choice. I either look dumb or I can act bad and or disengage. And so if I'm a middle school or high school student, I can almost guarantee you I'm going to either look bad, I'm going to act bad or whatever I need to, or just disengage, because I cannot just even deal with the fact that I might look stupid. And I'm pretty sure most of us would feel the same way. Teacher does not often get the IEP. And so I wanted to make sure I left that slide for myself to make sure I didn't forget to let you know that. So it's very important that you speak up and that you let the school know, and the teachers know. And so what if it isn't followed? This slide has a lot of information on it, but it's good common sense, and there are just some steps that you would want to do. And now in the remote world, where we know that students with IEPs or 504s are most likely not getting the extra small group or the extra accommodations or the extra supports, these steps become really important. Schools are not released of responsibility just because we are in a remote or a virtual learning environment. And so, yes, we need to teach our students and our scholars how to navigate, but we have to be more specific. So we have to make sure we keep that good documentation that Sarah, you know, was mentioning, having a binder that stays with them. Again, you advocating for your child until they learn how or feel more comfortable. Emailing the teachers, well, we know that's not going well for many of us. I know that several of you and I have talked about the schools blocking some of that conversation and some crazy things. And so you and I will continue to work through how do we get in contact with the teachers. I know from our end as a company, we are reaching out and we are just asking how we can be of more support. And if we don't get what we need, we continue to escalate and go up until we can get some of the help we need. And then at some point, you know, if we have to, then we take those next steps as an advocate and or as a legal team to move into the Office of Civil Rights. So the step-by-step protocols, and I believe I've included that for you just so you knew, okay, if this doesn't happen, what do I need to do next? We always tell them, just email the teacher. Well, guess what? They don't know how. It's not an acquired skill. I mean, it's not, you know, it's not a natural skill. And so whether you're emailing the teacher or whether we're training students how to email a teacher, they need guidelines. They need specifics. They don't know to go out and find the PDF version of the book if they've lost it. They don't know how to email. They don't know how to do those things. And I don't mean that in a condescending way by any stretch of the imagination, but just sitting with kids and watching them trying to navigate this remote learning, has really just raised our awareness. And really, we can see very clearly we've got to teach them, knowing that they're probably going to be in a remote learning environment for quite some time. How do you deal with interacting with your teachers, and what happens when they don't respond? Well, they may have 400 students right now, so there's a reasonable amount of patience, but then at the same token, it's still not okay. And so working closely with your child or figuring out how to help them get through this process is a pretty valuable piece. So here is our checklist, and it just literally is from that understood.org, where it highlights, again, what should you have, how should you do it, and just, I love those linear checklists. I'm a big fan, and it will help you stay organized and help you support your scholar in a different way. And again, I got that from understood.org, and you could literally probably just type in IEP, I can probably talk, IEP binder checklist, and you can find some of those other tools she had mentioned in her video. If not, remember, you have the link to the YouTube video where she describes the actual other documents that they have available on the site. So if they don't qualify for special support, one of the things that Deborah, Catherine, and I definitely put some brainstorming into is what happens if they don't get support, or what happens if they do and they're still not getting it. So we are going to launch the Learning Pods micro schools starting the week of October 19th. So for our middle school and high schoolers who have thought they were going back but are now back in quarantine, we have some tutoring services available that are a little different than what we have. So a learning pod is just a small group of kids who would come in to see us from 12 to 3 in the afternoons on Tuesdays and Thursdays for now. If we have more of a demand, then we'll open up the Monday, Wednesday for middle school, Tuesday, Thursday for high school. And so instead of maybe coming for their evening session or their Saturday session, they may come in and have us help them get through some of those remote learning requirements, and hopefully give us a little bit of time to do some of the interventions we're trying to do to get their skills back up. And so we definitely are trying to put that out there to the community. We're definitely trying to find some other sources for funding because we know a lot of people need it, and we know that not everybody has the extra resources and funding to be able to do it. So we're on a mission to get the help to you, but also to get the funding so that it's not going to prohibit anybody who wants the help from getting it. So those are our goals, and that's where we're headed. At the end of the day, I hopefully covered the things that I set out. I hope that I helped you learn the difference between the 504 and IEP. I hope that I help you understand how can I get the identification process started. And I know throughout the chat there were some questions. Maybe your student was getting tested and then COVID happened. And so again, I'm going to stick around and just do some chatting with you for some of those individual questions. Definitely tried to provide you with lots of resources and support, and hopefully gave you some solutions for success. And so I'm not sure what the survey may hold from Deborah and Catherine, but I see there's quite a bit of chat action in there. So I definitely want to address that. And then I want to move into thinking about your next steps. So as I'm looking through the chat, if you would just think about what your next steps might be, and I'll call on a couple of you to share, just so you have a clear plan on where do you go next. I see a lot of good feedback. Thank you, Kyle, for chatting in, you know, giving some insight from a teacher and an educator, master educator's viewpoint. Those are really important. And I am going to continue to look through these as well. And I like that, you know, again, sometimes you have great resources and references, and working together as a team of parents is pretty powerful and pretty valuable. So as you think about next steps, I'd love to, again, just hear from a couple of you real quick. I'll call on some folks that I haven't heard from. So how about you? Madonna, are you still on? I'd love to hear maybe some of your ideas on next steps.
Yes, I'm still on. My next steps is just trying to get my son a little bit more organized, getting him to slow down and really pay attention to what he has, the task that he has to do.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
What about you, Bianca? What are some of your next steps that you're thinking will be important for you and or your scholars?
I was just thinking how the process for the IEP had stopped, so probably reaching back again where I left off, which was with the Title I teacher at our school, and then getting the right connection for the IEP to get that going.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And, you know, I know this has been a challenging time for all of us, and especially if maybe your kids were not successful originally and had some gaps, whether they were in behavior academics and needed a 504 or an IEP. And so I'm going to close out the official part of the session. Again, I'm going to stay on and do some chatting for a little while. But I found a really good video that I think is really important for you to hear and or see right now as we wrap up. And I know that there are going to be some parts to all of you that you have some clear next steps. So I like Kid President, and he's got a big message to all of you. And so this is going to run for about 3 minutes. And I just think probably take it to heart because
Kid President. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, you've been through a lot. And so he has a message for moms and or dads. And he has a lot to say about what you've been through and how important it is to remember how awesome you are.
Dr. Break. Have fun for once. We love to see you have fun. Dance in the grocery store. I found all this stuff. Or sing in the middle of a driveway. Oh, it'll feel great. Great. And it'll scare your kids so much they'll be quiet. Number 9. Hug more, shout less. Look, I get it. Sometimes we do some things wrong. But growing up is scary. There's school, there's tests, there's telling times with clocks that have hands, there's tying your shoes, and kilograms and kilograms.
Kilograms?
I don't know, it's hard, but that's why I go to school. It's just hard to grow up. Sometimes we just need moms to tell us everything's okay. Number 10, the secret to changing the world, moms. Without moms, none of us will be here. Moms, kids love you, and you. If every mom in the world knew how awesome they were, every problem in the world would be fixed. From kids everywhere, thanks for believing in us, putting up with us, and straight up loving us. Mom, you keep us dancing. Send us to a mom.
So I saw some of you laughing, and I was happy about that because, again, life's been pretty serious. Things have been really kind of hectic for all of us, and I know it's been extra challenging for many of you to try to make sure your kids get what they need. I will definitely throw that link right now quickly into your chat box in case you know a mom or somebody that needs to see that as well. There you go, Sarah. Awesome. So any final thoughts if you want to hop in and just share? I'd love to hear from you what was valuable, and I am going to definitely address, whoops, I sent it only to Sarah. That wasn't very nice of me, but I sent it to everybody. That would be a little more helpful. There we go. So anyone, if you want to hop in real quick and just let me know what was helpful, I'd love to hear it. And if not, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope it was helpful, and we're here and we're ready to help.
Lori.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Barton, everything was just great and helpful. I wanted to just, in brief, can you over reward?
Well, great question. I guess it probably depends on a lot of things. I know for me in the past, I might have been accused of that, but I also was kind of crazy like a fox. And so in my classroom, my students hadn't been successful for a long, long time. And so when I ran my charter school, I actually gave them raffle tickets for putting their name on the paper. And so as crazy as that sounded, Dr. Martin, the reality was it worked, because all of a sudden they became thinking differently, and they began thinking about being a student, and they started taking the ownership and responsibility so that I could use a model we talk about in education of gradual release. So yeah, I started with overly rewarding, and then I did intermittent rewarding, and then eventually they were able to find some ways to reward themselves. So they took that internal ownership. So yeah, if you did it forever, probably, maybe, but teaching them that scaling piece was really, really good.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking.
All right, everyone. Well, if you have no more questions, if you could use your reaction button and give Lori a round of applause. Thank her so much for being here. We always appreciate her and all of her knowledge. Also, if you guys do want to get in contact with Lori to be a part of the tutoring center or learn more about it, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to send her information your way for that.